This week's lecture is entitled Meeting of the Minds. We begin our look this week at how Colorado was a place for the meeting of the minds by looking at the overview that the video provides to you. Meeting of the Minds is a title that I coined because in this early Colorado history, we look at how several cultures come together and try to determine how they are going to get along for the early part of Colorado history. We get a quick and a brief sense of what that might look like in the film The 5 States of Colorado that you have available to you this week. In the 5 States of Colorado, it begins with Southern Colorado. You look at Southern Colorado and see how the history started here in Colorado, and you get a look at all the rest of the different, what they coin as states of Colorado in the rest of the video. What I've done here in this slide is to show you how the states of Colorado correlate to our chapters in your textbook. As you can see, early Colorado history begins in Southern Colorado really and ends along the Front Range and in Denver. So this not only helps you kind of to map in your mind where geographically history is taking place early on, but how it progresses throughout the chapters. Our discussion today begins in Southern Colorado. As we begin our discussion in Southern Colorado, it's important to review who was here and where that history really is beginning. As we talked about last week, Frederick Jackson Turner defined history as a process that took place where the history began with a savage race and ended with a civilized race. So I begin the discussion this week with looking at the population that was present in Colorado prior to anybody else, and that was the Native Americans. We have evidence in Colorado history that Native Americans were present about 15,000 years ago. And I give you a couple pictures here just to further clarify for you what those points look like that were written out in the lecture. So you can see Folsom Points and Clovis Points, and those are indicators of early Native American settlements. And those are things that archaeologists have found within these sites and have documented. Another prominent culture here in Colorado is down in the Mesa Verde area, down in Southern Colorado. If anybody's ever had a chance to go, it's quite an amazing place. And what you can see is that there was a very different culture there. One who made these amazing cliff dwellings, lived there for upwards of about 2,000 years, and we saw a lot of evidence of what their lives looked like while they were there. They made baskets, they made pottery, they farmed up on the top of the cliff dwellings. It was a pretty amazing process to see. There's also evidence that they traded all over the United States, the people, or the Anasazi, who lived in the Mesa Verde area. Their trade went from California all the way to the East Coast and then down into Mexico. So we do have a lot of evidence of early Native American cultures here in Colorado. As we jump forward pretty rapidly, we begin to look at the cultures who were here in Colorado just prior to the Spanish coming in. And I'm looking predominantly at the cultures who we are going to hear time and time again in a discussion of Colorado history, and that's the Ute, the Arapaho, and the Cheyenne. As we begin our discussion about these different tribes, I think it's really important to point out that while there is historical evidence, in fact, that these native tribes came across the Bering Strait, I think it's important to note that tribes don't believe in the Bering Strait in general. Rather, they each have their own individual unique creation story that describes how they came from the land, and they do have a strong belief that they came directly from the land of Colorado. So the first group we're going to briefly talk about, and I want to give you a little bit of cultural background about, is the Ute. The Ute are still here in Colorado. There are two bands within Colorado, southern Colorado. Traditionally, there were 7 bands of the Ute, and they were a rather small tribe. They lived in kind of small communal bands who would go around during the different seasons hunting and gathering to take care of themselves. They would come together once a season, all of the bands, to be a part of the bear dance. And the bear dance was something that was handed down to them from stories and was part of kind of the seasonal rounds that they went through. The Cheyenne and Arapaho is the other group who were here prior to the Spanish coming in. And the Cheyenne and Arapaho were a very different group. They were very large. They came together for different sort of sacred ceremonies throughout the year, but they also functioned as one great big political unit. There were kind of a superstructure where there were 44 peace chiefs. There were military societies, and they actually had a very strong economy that allowed them all to live close together. And so you can see, if you look at the Cheyenne and Arapaho, that their tribe looked very different from the Ute, but that's not unique. If we look at all different tribes, they all have a different background, different and unique ways that they live their lives. So prior to people coming in, the Cheyenne and Arapaho were hunting buffalo. They would roam around. They're kind of the traditional Plains tribe when you think of a traditional Plains tribe, but they had a very strong political structure, unlike some other Plains tribes at the time. So now that we've established that different native tribes were here, they had very different beliefs and kind of backgrounds. We start to look at who is the next population to come in. The Spanish were the next population to come into Colorado. And the Spanish, for the most part during this time, really the 3 words that kind of coined them are gold, God, and glory. They came into the southern portion of Colorado briefly looking for gold, and that was really their push. They were trying to get the one up over France and over America at the time to basically claim their riches. So when they came into the southern portion of Colorado, they were trying to find gold. They didn't find anything, and they were actually pushed back quite a bit by the Ute at the time. So there wasn't a lot of Spanish settlement yet, but there was a lot of trading, a lot of mixture, and a lot of pushback by the Ute when the Spanish came in. One thing that the Ute loved and that they got from the Spanish at this time were the horse. The horse was a huge, huge change for the Ute and the Ute culture. It allowed them to span a lot more territory, to gather more things, more goods, and it allowed them to become a much more powerful tribe at this point in time. So while the Spanish were lingering a little bit in southern Colorado, we didn't see them pushing too much into Colorado, but there was a lot of intermingling with the Ute during this period of time. So for about 150 years or so, we see the Spanish, the Ute, the Navajo, the Comanche all kind of at war, pushing back, pulling, trying to establish some sort of relationship. By 1763, the Spanish legally acquire the south of Colorado from France, and so they hold that territory for about 200 years. In 1803, however, the Spanish government, because of the Louisiana Purchase, becomes very frightened that America is going to come into their territory, and so they begin trying to trade with tribes and trying to make friends with tribes so that they can maintain their boundary in southern Colorado. You can see in this picture right over here that when we acquired the territory in 1803 from Spain, we began a lot of exploration. And that exploration starts to come into Colorado. We see Pike coming down, exploring into Colorado, and Long, Fremont, all of them coming through Colorado, trying to figure out this new territory that they acquired from France. So as we become more familiar with the territory of Colorado, things start to change yet again. In 1821, the Mexican people actually gained their independence from Spain, and instead of Spanish territory, it is now Mexican territory. For about 20 years, almost 30 years, it's now Mexican territory, and we see a little bit change because there's really a new desire to start to trade and start to build the economy of Mexico up in Colorado. One of the major changes that we see in southern Colorado is a place called Bent's Fort, and I think this is a great example of what happens when the Mexican people gain their independence. They really do want to build their economy, and Bent's Fort is a place that's kind of right in between Mexican territory and American territory, and it kind of bridges that gap between the Mexican people and the American people. Bent's Fort is, I would say, a place that's a fantastic example of what I'm talking about in terms of the meeting of the minds. It's the place where we see 3 different ethnic groups come together and blend so that they can basically meet the needs of this new economy. Bent's Fort is a fort that was built kind of in the middle of nowhere, and it was built as a buffalo trading post. And what we see there is that several of the gentlemen who start the fort actually marry into the Cheyenne tribe, and they also marry into some of the indigenous Mexican populations as well. So they create this culture in which they are working within different ethnic groups so that they can promote tribes as well as the Mexican people's economy. It's a pretty, I would say, amazing situation, and one that really exemplifies what I mean in terms of the meeting of the minds. The Santa Fe Trail was a trail that allowed Bent's Fort, as I said before, to become kind of this economic hub, to go between this Mexican territory and the newly acquired American territory that we are just gaining because of the Louisiana Purchase. So Bent's Fort becomes this kind of middle ground where people have to figure out how they're going to work in basically a world that encompasses not only Native Americans, but Americans and Mexican people. Life changes yet again when there's the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. And so Mexican territory then becomes American territory when that area of Colorado is ceded to America. So we see within the span of about 300 years, about 250 more so, that the territory goes from a place in which it's predominantly Native American, Spanish, Mexican, to American people coming in just a little bit to finally American territory predominantly. So what I want you to really think about as we look at this week is how and why, when all of these people come together, do things turn out the way they do? Is there a reason, or is there not?